Welcome to the OPSQC podcast, helping entrepreneurs, innovators, and small business owners scale to profitability. The goal of this podcast is to showcase real businesses, real owners, tell their stories, learn a little, and have some fun while doing it. Our guest today is Locke Berkebile, co-founder and chief product officer at Crewchief Systems. Crewchief has quickly established themselves as a category leader, creating a SaaS product that allows pilots and maintenance people to manage your aircraft from anywhere and receive real-time safety, maintenance, operations, and compliance alerts directly to your mobile device. Welcome to the future of aircraft asset management. Please welcome Locke Berkebile from Crewchief Systems. Locke, thank you for joining the podcast. I know you're a busy guy and lining up schedules is tough, so I really appreciate your time.
Well, Jared, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
No problem. To kick this off, could you describe Crewchief Systems in your own words from like the 30,000 foot view? No pun intended.
Right. So we're in aviation. So 30,000 foot is appropriate. The easiest way to think of Crewchief Systems is if you take electronic medical records, think of electronic medical records and what those did for medicine, and you apply that to aircraft, kind of take Carfax and electronic medical records and you smush them together, but for aircraft. That's effectively what we do. We're a data company. We're in the transportation space, but we're specifically focused on small aircraft. And we can get into later what's going to happen to aviation in the future. But we think some really exciting things are about to happen in aviation, and we think it's going to be all around small aircraft. And it also happens that small aircraft are one of these industries that never got digitized. I've been working in technology for 20 years, and we've been digitizing industries for 20 years. And yet here's this whole industry of small aircraft that hasn't been digitized. So we don't have a lot of data. Everything is on paper. And that's what we're doing. We're going to change that and bring all the benefits of having, data available on vehicles to this industry that hasn't had it before.
That's very surprising. I think for many people, including myself, that especially in aviation, a critical industry, that there's not more, that people are still working off paper records in a lot of cases.
Yeah. It was surprising to me. So I got involved because my co-founder is an aviator, lifelong aviator. He knows the industry really well. Mm-hmm. I'm a product guy. So when we got together and I started digging into, what is this opportunity in aviation, I was surprised that everything is done on paper. Now, if you have $50 million jet, you pay people to take care of that for you.
Sure.
And they're going to manage all the records. Some of it is still paper, but they're going to manage it all for you. If you have a small aircraft, if you have a Mooney or a Diamond or a Cessna, you've got it parked in your hangar, maybe you have a few partners, everything is on paper. What I like to say is the only thing that's changed in the last 50 years is in your hangar, when you say, remember to change the oil, it's on a whiteboard instead of a chalkboard. That's the big change in the last 50 years. And so it surprised me when I started looking into it. But on the other hand, there are industries, right? You think about all the industries that have been digitized and modernized in the last 20 years. I came from education. Most of my career is in education. Before I did this, I worked for Apollo Education Group. We owned universities all over the world. And I did products for students who were remote. Mm-hmm. And that was a great opportunity because being in education, if you're familiar with education, it's surprising how slowly it changes and adopts new technology and takes advantage of all the kind of technological advances we've had in the last 20 years with the internet. So to go into an environment where I could build things for students who were attending remotely, using ebooks, this was really fantastic. And so when I looked at aviation, I'm like, I can't believe how similar this is to education. Like, here's this industry we think of as really advanced. Today we have airplanes that can land themselves. Even small aircraft have emergency systems. You push a button if the pilot is incapacitated and it lands itself. Full frame parachute, very safe vehicles. And yet you buy this vehicle for $1 million, and then you go and you buy a paper logbook and your mechanic writes in it. And so I was surprised by this. And, as soon as I started looking into it and realized this was what was going on, I saw how big the opportunity was. You get to some point and you think there's no more industries to digitize, but it's not true.
There's some out there, as you guys have found.
Yeah.
So did you start this business? You mentioned you have a partner who's a pilot. So can you talk a little bit more about the structure of the business, who it is that's involved, how long you guys been doing this, and what entity structure you chose?
Sure. Well, we started in 2018. So we've been doing this for building the product for a few years. My co-founder, Aaron De Zafra, has been in aviation his whole life, pilot. His brother was a Harrier pilot in the military. His dream was to be a military pilot as well, but had an accident when he was a kid and had some metal put in his arm, and that's disqualifying. So he ended up doing other things in aviation, going on to have a career in consulting, but has always had this passion for aviation. So I was at a point in my life where I knew, I was inspired by other entrepreneurs. I met Peter Diamandis and joined his organization, and he just has a passion for what entrepreneurs can do to do good in the world, to make the world a better place. And I thought, I've had a great career. I've been really fortunate, but I want to make a bigger contribution. I think I can do that through building companies. So I already knew I was going to leave my career and build a company, and I had some ideas. But we were at a poker game in Tahoe with the guys, and I mentioned I'm leaving my career. I'm going to start a company. This is what I'm going to do now. And my co-founder was there. He said, "Hey, I've had this idea for a couple of years. I think it could be a really big thing." We started talking about it. I started looking into aviation. I realized how large the opportunity was, especially given what's happening with aviation. And so that's how we got started. We talked through all the foundations of building a company, what it would look like. We were both leaving our careers, which was, that's a scary thing to do. So we talked about it for many months, and finally decided, kind of the beginning of 2018, we're going to do this, form the company in May. So, there were a lot of conversations on foundations. How are we going to structure? What kind of founders agreement do we need? We wanted to bake in a charitable aspect into it. There's a lot of foundation building I think it's important to do before you start a company, especially with a co-founder or multiple co-founders. So we went through that whole process, started the company around the middle of the year. We started as an LLC. The reason we did that was because leaving our careers, we had a lot of residual income. We wanted the tax advantage of being an LLC. We knew we would have to become a C Corp later when we got VC involvement. We haven't done that yet, but we know we're going to make that transition. But it was a great, LLCs were a fantastic deal for us because of the tax, pass-through advantage.
Right.
And we knew we were going to lose money for a couple of years because we're a product company. Revenue comes later. So that's how we did it. So about 3 years, and it's been a journey. We'll get into it, but it's been a real journey.
Appreciate that insight. Going back to the poker game at Tahoe, right?
Yeah.
A couple questions on that, right? Is one, was that poker game the impetus that made the decision, or was the decision already made when you went there? And then secondly, are you and your co-founder co-located in the same place?
Oh, good. Great question. So we have this poker game every year in Tahoe. Last year we took a hiatus because of COVID, but we're on this year. When we went to that, they didn't know I was leaving my career to, my friends didn't know I was leaving my career to start a company.
Okay.
I didn't know that my friend had this idea for a startup. It was completely organic. We were just talking, and it came up, and he said, I have this idea.
Mm-hmm.
I've had it for a couple of years. I know aviation. I know how badly it's needed. And, I said, well, that's really interesting. I mean, I have these ideas that I wanted to pursue, but that's really interesting. And I'd rather do it company with a partner than alone.
Mm-hmm.
The joke in startups, right, is the only thing harder than doing a startup with a co-founder is doing it without a co-founder. So recommend people try to get other people involved as partners when starting a company. So we didn't know. This was completely organic, and we left saying, I'm going to look into this and let me see how I feel about the industry, the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a $10 million company, that's not what I'm looking for. I want something that can scale to be $1 billion company, and it has to have a path to have an impact. Then I looked into it. I said, this is fantastic opportunity. It's really clear what it is. It's really clear where it can go, how big it can be.
Sure.
And then it was just a question of, how do we leave our careers? How do we transition into a startup? Like, what are our limits? When you go flying, you decide your limits before you take off.
Right.
If there's going to be weather, what is the threshold where you say, that's it? We're going to land now. We have to be safe. We had to go through the process then of talking it through, setting our limits. What is this going to look like? What does it mean for our families? All these kind of conversations had to happen. And that's why it took essentially from September of 2017, when we were in Tahoe, to May of 2018, when we actually formed the company.
Okay. So good,
Yeah.
we'll call it 7 or 8 months, 9 mons that you guys were in the ideation, really kind of laying the foundational piece of the business before you guys started really running a head full steam. That's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And I would point out, and transitioning out of our careers, because we were both in corporate roles.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron was at KPMG.
Mm-hmm.
I was at Apollo Education Group. And we had to make those transitions as well, to kind of prepare ourselves to be penniless founders. You get spoiled in the corporate world. We were both executives. He was a principal at KPMG. You get kind of spoiled, but we both wanted to challenge ourselves.
Sure.
We took time to figure out how that transition would happen.
You talked a little bit about a founder's agreement. That's something I haven't covered on the podcast before. And I'm really interested in what was the impetus for the founder's agreement? How much does this really detail? And how intricate of a process is that? So
for me, having the founder's agreement first was extremely important. The way we framed that is, we've been friends. My co-founder and I we worked together starting back in, I think, 1998. We worked together at a company called Scient. We built some of the world's first e-businesses. We built Realtor.com. We built Hotwire. We built, a bunch that didn't succeed too. We did Pets.com. For anyone old enough, they remember the sock puppet commercials for Pets.com. That one didn't succeed, but we worked together all those years ago. We've been friends ever since. We've raced sailboats together. We've done all kinds of things. We have this group of friends. They're all from the same company, from Scient, from way back in the .com days. And what we said is, if we do this together, we don't want to ruin poker. We don't want to ruin friendships. That's more priorities, right? We want to make sure that we have all the difficult conversations about the things that can happen in startups before we start the company, before we sign the operating agreement, all this kind of stuff. And these things are to give you a flavor for the kind of conversations that we had. Well, let me back up. Before I go into the details, here's how to think about this. If something bad happens and something undesirable happens with your company, that's the most stressful time in your life, probably.
Absolutely.
Certainly in your company's life, but in your life, that is not the time you want to be having the most difficult conversations, right? You want to have those conversations before you start it, before you decide to leave your career, before you decide to take the financial hit, all the things that you're doing to make this company happen. You really want to have those conversations first. So these are hard conversations. It's like, what if one of us just says, that's it, I've reached my limit. We haven't generated enough capital investment, enough revenue, enough whatever it is we need to keep going. That one of us runs out of runway to take off the airplane before the other one does. What happens?
Yeah.
Like, what happens to our equity? What happens to, what if I go get a job? What if my co-founder goes and gets a job? Can he keep vesting founders' equity, maybe by putting money into the company? What happens if one of us dies? It's like estate planning, right? It's like talking to your parents about putting things in a trust. Like, what happens if I die? I don't want, our spouse to be a business partner that's making decisions in the business, but I want them to be taken care of. I want them to benefit from the growth and the profitability of the business. So, these are the kind of hard conversations you have to go through. And then we had lawyers help us with writing. We wrote a draft. We had lawyers help us write the final version of the founders agreement. We signed it, and then some of those things got incorporated into the operating agreement of the company. For example, having a charitable aspect, we decided right up front. We were really inspired by Salesforce and the way they changed corporate, entirely changed the corporate giving and how it works with their 1-1-1 model. We wanted to do the same. So that was part of what we put in the founders agreement. So it's like, what are the things that are important to us? What happens when bad things happen? What are the values we want to bake into the foundation of the company before we even start it? And how, especially if you're doing it with friends, how do we stay friends, and how do we avoid situations where we're just, we mess up poker? We don't want to do that.
That is great advice. And, that's something, like I said, we haven't covered on the podcast before. So I appreciate you going into detail on that, because first and foremost, preserving friendships. I've seen startups go through where people have parted ways very bitter and angry. And it's a very difficult situation to be dealing with, very stressful as well. And I love the aspect you talked about, that when you're in the heat of it, that is not the time you want to be having these stressful conversations. So having the forthrightness to sit down ahead of time, come to the table, kind of do like almost like a failure modes. Here's the ways it can go wrong. How are we going to react to that? I love that, and I appreciate that. That's great advice for everybody listening. I hope you take a nugget from that and a lesson from that. So you guys have this founders agreement. Did you say if you're co-located in the same area, or are you guys remote?
Yes, thank you. We are not co-located. When we started the company, I was in the Chicago area in Illinois. My co-founder is in the San Francisco Bay Area in California.
Okay.
And I was already working from home. I had moved from the office. I was in San Francisco at Apollo Education Group. They closed that office to consolidate. I moved to Chicago to work with my mentor, who was in the Chicago area. We had an office, but we really didn't need it. So this was before COVID and all this. They actually shut down the office. We're going to save money. Everyone can work at home. We got a Regis space, so for meetings, if we needed to get together for meetings. So I was already used to, working remotely. I was also used to working with teams in India, in other locations. The same is true for my co-founder, Aaron. He, working at KPMG, he had clients all over the world, and he was used to working remotely. He would go visit them, of course, but most of the time you're on calls like on Zoom, like we are now. So we were both used to it, and we found it very natural to work together remotely. Also had the benefit, like I said, of knowing each other for more than 20 years.
Sure.
Well, for just when we started, just less than 20 years. that helps out a lot. I think if you are working with new people, it helps a lot to see them in person. But honestly, we have our development team is in Brazil. We've worked with people in Portugal and Nigeria and all over the place. And you can put together a team and you can get them working together. It's a little bit more difficult than it is in person, in my opinion. I like to go to an office and see people. So that's something we want to have an office eventually. That's the goal. But we found it very natural to work remotely, just I think because of where our careers were and what we did in our careers. It wasn't really an issue for us.
Excellent. More and more people are seeing the power of remote and diffuse organizations. I think commercial real estate and tenant real estate is forever changed based on this experience with COVID. It's interesting though, looking back a couple of years, you guys were already primed for that. You guys were already, that was a part of your routine. You guys were used to working in that space. Whereas there are a lot of people now are just getting acclimated to it. So it's something I think is here to stay though. And it's a powerful tool. Like, to your point, you don't have a brick and mortar. There's a piece of it where you don't have the overhead that you have to incur. So it's a very natural way to grow your business, I think.
Well, I think absolutely. And the astonishing thing we're seeing is in a lot of companies, maybe most companies, they're finding that their teams are more productive working remotely, which is, there was all this resistance to letting people work remotely. And now we're finding there's a lot of benefits to it as well. So I agree. I don't think things are going to go back to the way they were. Commercial real estate, unfortunately, for people in commercial real estate, will never recover to where it was before COVID. But there's also opportunities here. You look at aviation, you look at the future of aviation, which we might get into here. We're looking at these electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles becoming part of our transportation network. And in places like, I said, we work with our development team is in Brazil. You look at Sao Paulo in Brazil, it can take 6 to 8 hours to get from one side of the city to another. And if you need in-person meetings, think of the productivity losses of that. Whereas if you had these autonomous electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, you can put landing places anywhere and you can get across Sao Paulo in 20 minutes. Changes everything.
Absolutely.
And so I think with commercial real estate, going down, people working more at home and in the suburbs and moving away from the city centers, it really changes the dynamics of how this new aspect of our transportation network with these vehicles that are going to be coming around in the next decade of how they're going to get integrated into our lives. So I think, culturally, city centers aren't going away, but I don't ever see commercial real estate in city centers coming back to where it was before with office space. So I think, this is going to affect a lot of industries, a lot of companies. And I think everyone should think about, we're not going back to how we were. How's that going to change your business? How's that going to change the way that you work with your customers? How's it going to change the way that people travel and move around? How's it going to change how you do sales? How can you get more? I think it's fantastic to see all the efficiencies that people are bringing to their businesses. And I don't think we're done with those efficiencies, right? I think we've got a good decade now of digesting what we've learned in the last year and really operationalizing all the things we've learned in the last year. So for me, it's very exciting.
Yeah, you got the benefit of going from Chicago to Colorado. I'm kind of jealous in that regard. You operate remotely out in an area where you can get outside and enjoy some of the fresh air and the mountain atmosphere. So that's great. I really want to dive into that piece about the future of aviation. Okay, but right now I'd like to just put a pin in that one. Just one last question on the startup side. Going through and looking at how you funded this venture, right? Sounds like there was some out-of-pocket cost, more bootstrapping in the beginning as you went through ideation. Once you got it to the point of it's an active LLC in May of 2018. What has been the road for funding this venture?
Yeah, so we started out by putting our own money in, and over the course of the last 3 years, we put a few $100,000 of our own money in.
Wow.
We're very fortunate to be able to do that. I don't want to pretend like it's not painful to do that.
Oh,
That's part of being a founder.
Right.
You forgo income if you've left your career, and you might put money into the company as well. We raised a friends and family round, a $250,000 friends and family round. Again, we're very fortunate that we have friends and family and a network that supported being able to do that. Product companies are difficult because you have to lay out the capital to build the product before you can sell the product.
Sure.
A little bit different from services companies in that regard. So we raised that friends and family round, and we are now in the middle of raising a pre-seed round with angel investors. Okay. So one thing we are looking for is individuals who are aviation enthusiasts, who are passionate about the future of flight, the future of aviation, and want to take part in transforming part of that industry. We're looking for angels to invest. We're raising a $375,000 round, and we're about halfway through that. So there are a few slots, few opportunities for people to get involved in what we're doing. And then next year, we expect to raise a seed round with venture capital. With the venture capital, it's all about getting to a level of sales where they say, okay, we see the traction here, we see the reality here, and now we're willing to do $1 million round or $1.5 million round to get you to the next level. We see that being next year. This year, we have the product. We're just transitioning from our product foundations into our marketing sales phase, our high growth phase. So the money we're raising now is all about marketing. It's all about building our partner network, building our whole marketing kit, making that repeatable, building our sales team, hiring people, all that kind of stuff.
That's, any angel investors listening to the podcast, at the end of this podcast, I'm going to put the contact information where you can get a hold of Locke, because I think this is a great opportunity. This is a unique opportunity. And thanks for outlining what those stages were there, Locke. So really love you guys are putting the money back into marketing, getting the message out there, putting the money into development, making sure the product is solid. I know we've talked offline a couple times, and I know you guys are doing extensive testing. Can you talk about where you're testing, or maybe if you can't talk about specifics, at least give us a general idea of what kind of testing you're doing right now?
Yeah, so we have a series of products. I mean, the challenge we've given ourselves is large. We don't have just one product, because effectively we are a data company. That's how we think of ourselves, as we're a data company in the transportation space. We happen to be working with small aircraft. That's where we're getting our start. That's where we have our experience and background as founders. But we're really a data company. And as a data company, you have, there's a lot of facets into the data that you're collecting. And there's a lot of parallel challenges that you have. How do you get the data? How do you prioritize providing facets into that data for stakeholders? And that's been a journey for us. We started out with Crewchief GA, which is a product for small aircraft owners. Keeps all your maintenance, safety, maintenance, and compliance data with the aircraft, and virtual, which protects it because it's in paper records right now. Those paper records could be lost or destroyed. So we get the data of that aircraft by processing those paper records, digitizing them, and extracting the data from them. And we sell the product. Product is live. You can buy it today for small aircraft owners.
Okay.
So that's where we started. Really, the larger opportunity is with integrating the maintenance facilities, integrating the fleet managers, and those are different products that we're working on now. They're alpha versions now. We're working toward beta versions. We have a product called Crewchief MX, which is alpha version now, and we're working with our partner network to develop the capabilities of that product. We have a product called Crewchief FM, which is for fleet managers to get a view across their entire fleet. They might be charters, they might be a flight school, they might be a corporate fleet. but you want to view across the entire fleet. Like, I don't want all my aircraft to have maintenance in the same week. Like, I'd like to phase those. I'd like to be able to look very quickly at, how much emergency maintenance do I have? How much unscheduled maintenance do I have? Can I do better at predictive maintenance so I avoid unscheduled maintenance? These are where the opportunities are there. So we have a product that is also alpha. We're working toward beta for fleet managers. We have a partner network. Our goal is to have partners in every state so that our members, our customers, can go to a maintenance facility in any state that's a Crewchief partner. It uses our system, knows our system. So this is a challenge because these things are all getting built in parallel, all these products.
Right. Sure.
So the product we have in the market, it's live, it's stable, it's general release. You can buy it today. The products for the B2B customers, we are building, and we're building out a partner network. So, in terms of where we're at in our business, we would love to talk to small aircraft owners. We would love to talk to maintenance facilities for small aircraft. We would love to talk to fleet managers for, whether it's flight schools or charters that have small aircraft. We can help them, and they can be an early contributor to how this product evolves, how we build the capabilities. We can make their business more efficient. All the things, we can get into all the data aspects, but I think many people know from the last 20 years, all the efficiencies you can bring with data. We can do that for these companies. So in terms of where we're at with our product, that's who we want to talk to.
Yeah, I love that you guys started out with the small plane owners, right? And they were your original target market. And now you like you said, you wanted to scale this business. You wanted something that was scalable. So then you started looking at the fleets, and you started looking at these other customers, right? And going from B2C to B2B type of platform. And that's huge. I mean, that's a lot of the same tools exist between them, but there's unique challenges in each one. So I applaud you guys. Like you said, it's a big undertaking, but it sounds like you guys, one, you have a product that's being utilized and tested and, by the actual customers today. People can purchase this right now, which we'll put a link at the end of the podcast for that as well. And then you're looking for people to give more input to see what they would want or what's more beneficial to them. I think you guys have a very good idea, or else you wouldn't have started the venture, of what is required, but it gets into the ease of use, and it's more the how do I want to say, the actual interfacing, right? Is the side you want to optimize.
Yeah, 100%. And, I would also add to that we're going to be, world's largest general aviation event is AirVenture Oshkosh in Wisconsin.
Right.
Especially in the Illinois area. Many people are familiar with it. It's not only a great show for the aviation industry, it's a great show for spectators and the air show and all that. We'll be there. Last year it didn't happen for obvious reasons. So this year, we were there 2 years ago doing market discovery and talking to people about prospect of what we were building. We're there now with a mature product. We're really excited. So I would encourage people to come to the show and say hi to us.
Is there any others coming up that you're going to be at? I mean, you mentioned the Oshkosh one, but are there others that you're going to be present at? Well,
next year, there are two major events in general aviation in the U.S. every year. One is Sun and Fun in Lakeland, Florida. That happens at the beginning of the season. And the other is Oshkosh AirVenture, which happens at the end of July.
Okay.
So more toward the end of the season. And we will be at Sun and Fun next year. This year it didn't happen again. So, as things get back to normal, we'll be at both of those shows.
Awesome. Stop out and see the guys from Crewchief in Oshkosh.
100%.
Definitely.
Love to see you. Whether you own an aircraft or not, just say hi.
Absolutely. Question on the biggest challenge that you've seen so far starting this venture and getting to the point where you are now. So looking over the last, 3 to 4 years, what would you say has been the biggest challenge?
Jerry, there's so many challenges. I like to tell people that, I've been very lucky to have some great challenges in my career and my corporate career. And this is 10 times harder than anything I've ever done. It's taken creativity. It's taking, there's every other week, there's problem we don't know how we're going to solve. It takes persistence. It takes grit. It takes creativity, and it takes a little trust too. I mean, you don't always know what next week is going to look like. There's something that Elon Musk said that's always stuck with me, and it's proven to be true with Crewchief systems. Someone asked him about his experience being an entrepreneur and what it was like starting companies and being a founder. And he said, starting a company is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. He said, it's like eating glass because you don't get what you want. You don't get to do what you want to do every day. You have to do whatever is required today, this week. And you don't know when you start the week what that's going to be. You don't know what the emergencies are going to be. Whatever comes up, that's what you have to deal with. I think his example is they ran out of USB cables in their early builds of the Model S. And he went out with everyone else to around the entire Bay Area to every Fry's and bought up every 3-foot USB cable in the Bay Area because they had some supply problem coming from China. Their shipments didn't arrive. And he said, that's what I had. I had other stuff to do. There's fundraising. There's, all the same stuff we have. You got to talk to investors. You have to do sales. You have all this stuff. He said, but that day, what I had to do is drive around the Bay Area with everyone else on my team and find every USB cable that we could find so the production line didn't shut down. So it's like eating glass, and it's like staring into the abyss because you're looking at failure every week. The potential of failure. Sorry, let me turn off Siri. She's trying to tell me something. So, I don't want to discourage people because it's also the most fun I've ever had in my career. But, what is the biggest challenge? I think it's, really just trusting and having the fortitude. Like, every problem we faced, we've worked through. And what's allowed us to do that is grit and perseverance and just trusting that we'll find a way. We don't know what it is right now. We don't know what's going to happen next week. We don't know where the capital is going to come from yet. But we trust that a path will happen. And I think that's the hardest part. I mean, there's a lot of talk in the last year, especially the last year, but certainly leading up to 2020, there was increasing talk about founder mental health and, just the challenges of the mental fortitude and psychological fortitude you need to have. And I would encourage everyone to not ignore that. Like, really find people you can talk to, really find groups of entrepreneurs you can talk to. And, if things are really challenging for you as a founder, don't hesitate to go find professional help too, because there's a whole industry now for founders where you can talk to somebody who understands the problems of founders and can talk you through the challenges you're going through. So I think easily the biggest challenge is just the mental and psychological fortitude. It's been 3 years and we're still raising funds. We're still a year away from probably growing and paying ourselves on revenue. We're not going to pay ourselves until we have venture capital. And meanwhile, you have all the challenges of keeping the startup going and keeping it alive. And these things are hard. So what I would say to people is it's challenging, but it's rewarding. It's fun. If you're thinking about being an entrepreneur, surround yourself with people you can talk to because it's going to be important.
And you make a great point. It's easier now probably than any other time in history because of, the reach of the internet for one. I've had Jason Jacobsohn from Propellant Ventures, which is a small VC fund, but Jason also is a managing partner of the Founders Institute in Chicago. And I know they run cohorts all the time. And, those resources are out there. If you want to be an entrepreneur and you think this is for you, that's a great place to start. Take your idea, go get involved in one of these cohorts and you'll get a much better understanding of what's out there. And it helps with the thought process because, to your point, you surround yourself with a support network and a good group of people, because there's so many people out there who understand, this is the growth engine of the US, right? Entrepreneurs, small
100%.
businesses, we are the growth
Yeah.
engine. We're the ones really driving innovation. And that's important. Resources are out there. So I appreciate you chiming in on that piece there.
Yeah, 100%. And thanks for mentioning Jason and Propellant. They do for people anywhere really, but in the Illinois area, they do Founders Night Out with Gamer Jibe, which is a VR. We were talking earlier about how we're adapting, working remotely and collaborating remotely.
Yep.
Jason does Founders Night Out with Gamer Jibe, which is one of Propellant's companies Propellant has invested in. And it's a virtual environment where you interact with other founders. And that's a fantastic place to meet people, other founders you can talk to.
Joe Lee and I talked the other day. I'm trying to get him on the podcast in the future, so I'll keep pushing.
Fantastic. Good.
Talking about future of aviation. So when you look at Crewchief 3 to 5 years out, what's your vision, or what is Aaron's and your vision?
So right now we're focused on these small aircraft, that everybody's seen. If you've seen local airports, Cessnas, Diamond, Mooney, single engine piston aircraft, up to 6 seats. Most of them have 4. Some of them have 2. This is where we're focused now. But if you look forward the next 10, 20 years, aviation is about to undergo the biggest transition it's seen since World War II. World War II, aviation really blossomed and it became a force in the military. But then after the war, it became something that civilians could do. They could buy an airplane. The Cessnas really started selling. And it became part of, every portion of America. And that was an enormous transition where the industry grew because people were buying airplanes. Doctors were buying airplanes to go visit patients and so on. But since then, not a lot has changed in general aviation, in just aviation that most of us are exposed to. But what's about to happen over the next 10 years is there's this new class of aircraft. They're electric, vertical takeoff and landing. The first versions are going to have about 150, 200 mile range. But of course, that's going to grow as energy density and batteries grows, all that kind of stuff. Uber has been working on this. Actually, they had a division called Uber Elevate, which was working with a number of manufacturers. That Elevate division got transitioned to Joby, which is one of the manufacturers. So they don't have that division now. But Uber is thinking about how to integrate this into their network so that when you say, I want to go from here to here, it's not just about cars. It's about what's the most efficient way to get you there. In the same way you can get an Uber Black, you can say, well, I want, an Uber Elevate, which will say, I'm going to take you from here to Skyport. And then instead of taking 40 minutes to get from here to here, we're going to take you 10 minutes or 15 minutes in this aerial vehicle. And then you'll get a car to your final destination from the Skyport there. This is going to, in the next 10 years, we're really going to see this commercialized. Right now, the vehicles there are a lot of manufacturers, like the early auto industry. There are like 100 projects and they all think they have the thing. We'll see this consolidate down to, 3, 4, 5, 6 manufacturers that really have the winners. Joby is probably one of them, Lilium, Volocopter, Beta. There are a whole bunch of them.
Sure.
But what's going to happen with these vehicles is they're going to change the way public transportation works. They're going to change the way living in the suburbs work. If you think about the Chicago area, if you live in Aurora and you want to just go into the city for the evening, that's a big undertaking because especially if you get, involved in traffic, it's a nightmare, right?
Couple hours easy.
This is going to couple hours easy, but this is going to change that because 20 minutes you can be walking downtown from Aurora, for example. This is what's going to happen in the next 10 years. And if you look at bunch of analysts have looked at this. If you look at Morgan Stanley's report on this, that transportation segment of the market, which is cargo and passenger transit with these new class of vehicles, over the next 20 years is going to eclipse all of aviation today. And that's airliners, global aviation, outside of the military, it's everything. It's all outside of the military aviation. It will be a larger market than that. And it's already happening. So I think people aren't really aware of what's happening, but these autonomous vehicles now are already being used to move cargo around to remote communities. They're already being used, Amazon, some people have heard about what Amazon is doing with drone delivery. But really over the next 10 years, this is all going to get integrated into our life. And so we, when you say, where do we want to be in the next 5 years? Well, we want to, from now until then, position ourselves as the company that's building the digital ecosystem for that new industry. That it doesn't exist today. But I tell you what, if you buy a fleet of Joby vehicles and you operate them in the Uber network, you're not going to go buy a paper logbook for those aircraft.
No.
But nobody's thinking about that aspect yet. They're thinking about the vehicles. How do we get the vehicles certified with the FAA? How do we overcome the regulatory hurdles of airspace? These are the kind of problems. How do we do noise abatement? These are the problems they're thinking about. We're thinking about the digital ecosystem that you need, the data ecosystem that you need to operate those vehicles safely and efficiently.
And just to attach some rough numbers for the listeners of the podcast, right? 2019, some of the data you shared with me, there's a little bit over 11 million flights that are non-airline related. And looking at where we're going to be in 2032, I mean, we're talking like, well over 10x. I mean, we're talking
18x,
185, 18x, almost 20x, right?
By 2032.
For 20.
Yeah, if we're talking general aviation, which is non-airline flights, not military and non-airline, every other flight that occurs by 2032, so in the next 10 years, we're talking about an 18-fold increase in the number of flights. And that's because these aircraft that we have today, they're not heavily utilized.
Right.
But when you think about an Uber, it's taking passengers one after the another all day long. And that's what these vehicles are going to do. And that's why we're going to see this increase in the number of what we call them cycles in aviation, but a cycle just means you take off and you land. We're going to see a massive increase in the number of cycles. And these are revenue generating flights, right? Unlike today, if you have a flight school, all your flights are revenue generating, but they're infrequent.
Well, think about with the COVID impact, right? I mean, people traveling commercially, you're packed like sardines inside a commercial airline. But if you had like an Uber type service, autonomous vehicles, where you didn't have to be with other groups of people, I mean, in today's environment, that would be thriving, absolutely thriving, I think.
Well, in the cost effectiveness, once you get electric vehicles and once you get the range where it needs to be and the charging times where it needs to be, the operating efficiency is incredible compared to internal combustion engines, piston engines. There's less moving parts. There's less to go wrong. They're safer. They all have full frame parachutes. They'll all have autonomy, which can respond in emergencies effectively. Initially we'll have pilots in these vehicles, but in 20 years from now, we won't have pilots. So you bring all these things together and the operating efficiencies are incredible. And as the ranges increase, I do see a world where, instead of short haul getting on a tube with 100 other people, you take your own vehicle that has 6 seats because you can, and it's cost effective. So I see this changing the entire landscape of how we think about travel within the United States. Global flights are not going to change. It's just like that's going to be exactly the same as it is today for a long time, probably more than 20 years. But for short haul flights and for getting from San Francisco to Los Angeles or getting from Chicago to Indianapolis, it's going to change that.
Well, and a key piece that you guys have concentrated on as well is that with all this growth, there's going to be changes to the regulatory environment, right? There's going to need to be direct traceability to a lot of things that currently is not there through the current environment being not digitized. So this platform you're creating is critical to that. So you and I talked before about category kings, right? And
Yeah.
the book Play Bigger. That's one I've been reading recently, and it was given to me by the mentors in the predictive index consulting coaching area. And I love that book because it talks about these category kings. These are people looking ahead to new ground, new areas, just like you guys are doing. You guys are creating a new niche category that needs to be addressed. And you're one of the first in. You're doing a lot of very aggressive work. You're developing it very fast. I think you guys are going to establish yourself as a category king in this realm.
Well, that's the goal. And Christopher Lockhead is one of the authors on Play Bigger, is a friend, and Aaron De Zafra, my co-founder, and I worked together with him at Scient. He was a chief marketing officer at Scient back in the .com days. And, he really inspired us to think in terms of categories. And so we're creating this, we're creating a new category because what we're doing doesn't exist today.
Right.
There's software that is for aircraft management. There's software that's for maintenance facility shop management. But none of those things do what we're doing, which is aggregating the data of the aircraft and making sure it lives for the life of the aircraft with the vehicle, and that everyone who uses the vehicle in the future can benefit from that. So we call it aircraft asset intelligence. And that's the idea, is that the data of the vehicle should live with the vehicle for the life of the vehicle. And anyone who interacts with the vehicle or is a stakeholder in that vehicle, whether they're a passenger, a maintainer, an operator, a broker, should be able to benefit from that data.
So with the platform you guys are creating, you mentioned that if somebody wants to go out and get this app, that it's available online. Is this something they can download directly from the internet? And for the larger platform customers that are in like alpha beta mode, is that going to be the same avenue to access it?
Well, as a data company, we're 100% cloud and mobile. You can go to our website, sign up, you download the app on your iPhone or your Android phone, and you can use it right away. You can scan your records. Your paper records can represent a large percentage of the value of your aircraft, actually, for these small aircraft, because if they're destroyed, you have to redo every inspection that you're legally required to do. And in some cases, that can be more than the value of the aircraft to pay for that.
Sure.
So right in our app, you can scan your logbooks into our system. So immediately they're protected, they're backed up, they're saved. We preserve the value of your aircraft through that process. You can do that right away when you sign up. And then we have a web interface as well.
I love that. This is an asset, like you said. I mean, you can't sell your aircraft without fulfilling certain obligations. And your platform makes it very easy to manage that data and to, warehouse and archive that data so that it's not lost. Because I can't imagine, like, if there's a, freak accident, somebody loses their data in a fire and now they got to replicate that. There's got to be a huge cost to getting all those inspections done again.
Yeah, 100%. In fact, I'll share a story. One of our partners is Airborne Aviation. The founder of Airborne Aviation is an aircraft mechanic. And he got an aircraft essentially for free. The reason it was free was because the logbooks had been lost. And it's an old aircraft. So if you have an aircraft from 60s, 70s, 80s, those are perfectly fine aircraft because of the way airplanes are maintained. Those airplanes are great vehicles. They have a long life because they're maintained so well, because legally they have to be maintained so well for safety purposes.
Sure.
He got this aircraft for free because the logbook was lost. It was lost in a fire or flood. I'm not sure how it was lost, but he got it for free. But as a mechanic, he was able to do himself all of the legally required operations, inspections, and repairs that were needed to bring it current, and he could recreate the logbook by doing those. But no one else is going to buy that airplane because the cost of the inspections and the repairs are more than the value of the aircraft. So this is why it's so important. And this is true all the way up to, there's one of these funny reality shows is Aircraft Repo, and where they go repossess airplanes where they haven't paid their things. And if anyone's seen that, they know one of the big deals is you can't just go take the airplane. You have to know where the logbooks are and you have to get them. And if they're in a safe in an office, well, guess what? You're out of luck because you can't take that airplane back. It's not worth anything. So the fact that people aren't digitizing their records and preserving them in the cloud is lunacy. And, that's just one aspect of what we do, but it's very important.
Absolutely. I love that story. That's because, I mean, we're talking what, 6 digits plus at least for an airplane of that nature. Crazy.
Yeah, it varies. I don't want to discourage people. I mean, everyone should go fly in a smaller plane. It's fun. It's exhilarating.
Mhm.
You can get an old Cessna for, $60,000. It's like,
really?
Equivalent of a family car.
Mhm.
And that it will be well maintained. There are some expenses every year to maintain it
Sure.
at the level it needs to be maintained at. But, aviation is accessible. But if you go buy a new Cirrus aircraft, state of the art, it's
Mhm.
$750,000, $1 million. These are expensive vehicles, and you want to preserve the value of that vehicle.
Absolutely. You mentioned early on that in your founders agreement, you guys put
Yeah.
together a charitable aspect of the company because you look back at the 111 model that was used by Salesforce. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, and what drove it?
Yeah, well, we were both inspired by Salesforce and how they changed charitable giving in the corporate space by forming the Salesforce Foundation, by committing and sharing the 111 model, where they're committed to donating 1% of their product, 1% of their people's time, their employees' time, and 1% of their profits to charity. It funded the Salesforce Foundation, and it really changed charitable giving and the way companies think about charitable giving. So we were really inspired by that. I lived in San Francisco for a long time and went to Dreamforce as one of the big events every year in San Francisco is Salesforce's Dreamforce conference, and they always it was such a great event, and it is a great event because they didn't just talk about their product. They also brought in people who are an inspiration to other founders because, a lot of entrepreneurs use Salesforce. They brought in people who are inspirational. Tony Robbins came and talked one year, and it's just a high energy event. And they brought in the charities that have transformed the world with the Salesforce Foundation. And so that was a big inspiration to us.
Yeah.
So when we started Crewchief, we wanted to make sure the operating agreement included the Salesforce model. So there are a lot of great aviation charities. We will be donating 1% of the product we sell to aviation charities. Honestly, probably more than that. But as we sell product, we'll set aside at least that 1% and donate that to aviation charities so they can have their planes on our system. And 1% of our employees' time. Now, we don't have employees yet. We have a development team, we have a customer team, but none of them are employees yet. But we will be donating 1% of our employees' time to charitable organizations, and 1% of our profits will go to charity. So that's important to us. Aviation is a great place, to contribute in charities. There's a lot of good organizations that do, rescue flights, search and rescue, medical, flying people with different conditions and cancer to medical appointments, especially from remote communities, doing animal rescue. There are really lots of good stuff that pilots do in the world. And we're excited to be able to contribute to that.
I love and I appreciate that you guys are doing that because nothing speaks to me more than entrepreneurs building great things, doing great things, but having an aspect of altruism to it. And I know you and I are both members of the SIL organization, Strategic Introduction League, Chris Johnson runs, which is altruistic, humble, and hungry. And that really speaks to me, especially with my other business where we do a growing through giving model. Because I think it's so important that, yes, you can be a capitalist, but you can give back and you can contribute to your local economy, the national economy, or even different aspects, niche groups that are doing great things, like you said, the rescue aspects and charters and like that. So thank you for taking that time during the planning process to build that into your system. I hope more and more people do that over time here.
And again, we talked earlier about talking these things through before you found the company.
Yeah.
And I think having that be part of your operating agreement and your founding documents is something every entrepreneur should think about, because it's one of these things that, Chris Johnson and Sil, which you mentioned, great organization because they talk about combining opportunity and altruism.
Yes.
And, one of the reasons I became an entrepreneur and one of the things that's inspired me is people have become entrepreneurs because they want to have a bigger impact, because they want to do things that are going to do good in the world. And, Mark Benioff is an example of that with Salesforce. Peter Diamandis is an example of that with his companies and the X Prize Foundation. And so, think about that, because not only can you do good, but it can boost your business as well, because when you give, you also receive. That's the way the world works, in my opinion. You
Absolutely.
give first and you receive second.
Always give more than you receive, and you'll be
100%.
a wealthy person. Yes. Any marketing channels that prove superior to others? I mean, you talked a little bit about being at the Oshkosh event, the Sun and Fun event. You guys are present online. For a software platform serving a very niche area, is there a marketing avenue that speaks louder than others?
Well, we're just starting our marketing journey. We've been developing product. We now have a mature product and 2 products that are becoming mature. And so we've just started our marketing journey. But aviation, especially small aircraft aviation, is a really interesting industry in that pretty much all the pilots read a few publications.
Sure.
And again, in the spirit of where aviation is coming from, they're all paper. You receive them in the mail. But they all read 1 or 2 magazines. And so, one of the avenues for us, and one of the things this closing our pre-seed round, which we're raising now, will do for us is allow us to run a print advertising campaign, which is hilarious given we're a data company and we're trying to digitize things. But the reality is that can get 80% of the eyeballs of pilots on what we're doing by doing a print advertising campaign.
Sure.
So we're certainly going to do that. There are these 2 events that really, especially AirVenture Oshkosh is the one event the whole industry is focused on every year. So we're fortunate to have these concentrating elements in our marketing channels, and we're going to take advantage of those. But we're experimenting with digital advertising, and we don't know yet. We have some hypotheses about how digital marketing will work in our space. We have some we have a hypothesis about how influencer marketing will work in our space. We don't have the data yet. And honestly, we need the next tranche of capital to do more experiments in marketing and to get the results. So the one thing I would say is you want to be data focused. You want to have, a hypothesis, and you want to have a way of testing it. I'll give an example, which maybe will help people. For small aircraft owners, there's a registry that the FAA has, and all the owners are on that registry. Now, a lot of them are companies because they put their aircraft in an LLC, and then the owners are members in the LLC.
Sure.
But fact is, there's a list of all the addresses of the owner or the owning organization. And one of our funders who knows the aviation space says, why don't you just go get that list and do direct mailing to them? And again, that's hilarious because we're a data company and we're trying to digitize everything. But the reality is you have to do the test and you have to go with whatever is going to work, get the best results. And in that case, we said, well, it's too expensive to just mail to the whole country and the whole list, but you want to do a test. So we'll pick a metro. We haven't done it yet, but we're going to pick a metro. We're going to get all the addresses in that metro. We're going to do a direct mailing campaign to those aircraft owners. And we're going to see what the rate of engagement is from that campaign and get the data back. And so you got to be willing to do the tests, keep an open mind, do small tests, get the data, and then pump the money, limited dollars you have, pump them into the channels that work.
Right.
And you got to be willing to accept what those are. I'll tell another story which might help people. So I worked with universities all over the world. One of our universities was in Brazil. And Brazil, like the United States, has very rural areas and very urban areas. Then they're very different. But in Brazil, the chasm, let's say, between those 2 extremes is greater. So, in a lot of these Amazon communities, they don't have the internet. They have, you can do paper marketing to them. and you have to get creative and do other kinds of marketing. So this university, which we're helping, be online, be global, have mobile apps, be all the way on that end of the spectrum, their advertising model for these rural communities, which source a lot of their students, was literally a car with a bullhorn on the roof driving through the town, telling them about the benefits of education and what they can do in their life and their career if they get an education, and how they can pursue that. And when I found that out, I couldn't believe it. But the reality is they tested it. It's successful. It works. And so, you got to be willing to be creative. We talked about Chris Lockhead earlier.
Yeah.
He says things like, you're at an event, steal all the napkins and replace them with napkins with your logo and your tagline on it.
Yeah.
So, get guerrilla, get creative, try things out, see what works. That's what you have to do.
I love it. And the point about, I'm a data guy, so I totally appreciate that aspect.
Yeah.
But the testing is so important. I think we come into these startups and these small businesses with so many preconceived notions on what should work and what shouldn't work. And then when you try some of those things, you're like, oh, what the heck? It must be them. It's not me. It's them. To your point, do the testing. Come in with an unbiased, open mind. Do the testing. Let the data speak, and you might find that something really creative. I actually, Savure is a marketing group that takes a very creative approach to things. I've used them for one of my businesses because they bring that type of mentality to it, right? Whereas I would have more preconceived notions of what I should do. I hand it over to them and say, here's who I want to get to, and here's what the product is. Test and show me what the best way is, right? And so we're very active in that. And I have a huge appreciation for marketing that I did not have before I was an entrepreneur. After being an entrepreneur, you gain a much deeper appreciation for that whole space and what people bring to the table. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, 100%. And Jared, I would add to that, you talk about coming in with preconceived notions, and it's so true. And I think as an entrepreneur, you have to think about the destination you want to get to, and you have to let people around you give you the ideas, tell you things, and you have to have that open mind to, okay, I wasn't thinking about it that way, but how can we test what's going to work? One of my favorite books for entrepreneurs is Dan Sullivan's Who Not How. And, Dan Sullivan has probably coached and mentored more entrepreneurs than any human alive over the last 40, 45 years. And, his mantra is, if you are always trying to think in your mind, how am I going to do this? That's, that's the wrong approach. It's the wrong, how am I going to do this is the wrong question. Who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to listen to? The more people you can get involved, the more ideas you can have, the more creative you can be. And the more you think you know everything coming into it, the more limiting it is.
Yes.
And so that's the mindset I try to take. It's not easy, because if you think you know everything, you think, I can do this in like 2 days. Yeah. If you listen to everyone and you find the right people, it's going to take weeks. But I would encourage people to take that attitude. It'll make your life a lot more fun, more interesting, more effective. You'll be more productive as an entrepreneur. So.
It definitely shows that you follow people like Peter Diamandis and Tony Robbins and Dean Gracias, because they all talk about that. It's like, don't get tied up in the how. If you get tied up in the how, you're not going to take that next step, because you're so worried about what's that next step. And if I don't know what it is, what do I do next, right? And yes, there is a point that'll come along, but think about the end. Think about where you want to be, and the how kind of presents itself, which is very difficult 100%. For a lot of people to grasp. Very difficult, because back to your trust point, is it takes trust. It takes trust in the process. It takes trust in your own creativity and your own skill set, and trust in the people around you supporting you. And that's where the growth really happens as an entrepreneur.
That's so true. 100%.
Yeah. A couple of more questions for you.
Sure.
This is really great conversation. But what is the biggest lesson you learned being an entrepreneur?
You know, I am going to go back to who, not how again, because I'm still learning that lesson. I encourage other entrepreneurs to think in terms of who do I need to talk to solve this, and who are my who's that can help. And even though in my mind I'm bought off on that concept, I still need to learn it, right? Because our instincts are to, I have 100 things that need to happen today. This is just going to take 2 minutes. I know how to do it. Let's do it. Having that mindset where you're thinking about it in terms of, I really need to be creative here. I need to know who I need to surround myself with. And if I have 100 things to do and I do them myself, that's not going to be scalable. It's not going to get me where I need to go.
Sure.
And so I'm still learning that every day. That's been the hardest lesson for me. And I'll probably be learning it for the next 10 years, Jared. Sometimes I can be hard-headed.
I just watched Undercover Billionaire last night. Grant Cardone is on that.
Fantastic. Yeah.
To your point, that is one of the key things. All three billionaires that were basically the premise is they are dropped in the middle of a city with only a used car, $100 in their pocket, and basically a cell phone, but they wiped all their contacts. And you have to start $1 million business in 90 days is the whole premise of it. It's a huge challenge. And, you got these billionaires who are very successful people get in there. And it's amazing because exactly what you said, the who, not how, is where they go to right off the cuff. They're like, I got to find shelter for the night. First thing out, who do I need to talk to? Who can help me with this? And then talking about like, okay, if I'm going to turn, this $100 into $1 million, who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to connect with? And they start exactly at that point. That's amazing.
Perfect example. Yeah.
So somebody listening to the podcast today, Locke, how can they help and support you in your business aside from the obvious, downloading and using the app? But like, how can people help you grow and meet your objectives of Crewchief?
Well, the biggest way right now is we're reaching out to angels, people who want to invest in startups, people who want that to be part of their investment portfolio and are passionate about the future of aviation. We want investors who are engaged in our industry and in aviation because something that I would, again, it's something I would encourage all entrepreneurs to think in terms of is not every dollar is equal in capital. You want your capital to be coming from people who are going to be a resource for you, who are going to be your who's. We were talking about Dan Sullivan and who, not how. You want your capital providers to be people who are your who's for hiring, for connecting you to the right people, to getting you to your next round of funding. And we've talked to over 100 capital providers. They're not all the right people for our business. We've turned some of them down. So the thing we need most actually is we need force multipliers. We need who's to help us find the people who are angel investors, who want to be angel investors and are passionate about aviation, know aviation, would be a customer if they weren't, also a capital provider, and we'd give it to them for free, but they would be a customer if they weren't. And people who are interested in the future of aviation and the future of flight, these autonomous takeoff and landing vehicles. People are passionate about that. That's who we want to get connected with, is people who are passionate about this, who could be capital providers and partners for us. That's what we need the most right now.
And what's the best way for them to get a hold of you? So at the end of the podcast, I'm going to put some links, but do they reach out to you on LinkedIn, email? What's the best way?
Yeah, LinkedIn would be great. If you go to our website, which you'll share, they can go to the support link right there. There's info@crewchiefsystems.com and there's support@crewchiefsystems.com, or they can go to LinkedIn for me or my co-founder. We're also on Facebook, Instagram as Crewchief Systems. You can find us there. You can reach out any of those ways. LinkedIn is probably best.
Excellent, excellent. And Locke, I know you and I could probably go on for a couple more hours. In the past,
Easily.
there's a lot of different avenues we could go down different roads of like Wim Hof and different things. So, in the essence,
Another time.
I want to thank you for taking the time being on the podcast, sharing your experience. It's extremely valuable. Appreciate your insights. I'm anxious to see what happens with Crewchief, what the future holds for you guys. So before we sign off, any last minute words of wisdom for any new entrepreneurs?
Yeah, well, Jared, thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. We could talk for the whole rest of the day, but unfortunately, we both have to go on to our next meetings. But one thing I would say is I'm passionate about helping entrepreneurs, especially young entrepreneurs. I've talked to other people. We mentioned SIL and Strategic Introduction League. I've talked to other people about helping young entrepreneurs, but I love helping entrepreneurs, any entrepreneurs. So, my time is limited, but if you're an entrepreneur and you want some guidance, I spend time every week talking to other entrepreneurs, whether it's in these groups or individually. And, I'm happy to do that for your listeners who think that anything we talked about could help them. Jared, I also, we formed another company just because of Crewchief Systems and our development team in Brazil that provides development services for startups, cloud and mobile. And, that's something we can help you with. Even if we don't provide the services, I can give founders guidance on how they get the technical aspect of their business up and running. So, don't be afraid to reach out. Everyone's time is limited, but I really get joy out of talking to other entrepreneurs and helping them out. So don't be afraid to reach out.
Appreciate you in the work you do on both fronts, Crewchief and your other business. And I definitely urge people, reach out. Don't be afraid. I mean, you got to connect with the right people. It's the who, not how, like Locke talked about here. So thank you again. And to our listeners, be well, be safe, and be productive. To reach out to the guys from Crewchief Systems, you can find them both on LinkedIn. Locke's and Aaron's LinkedIn addresses are below. Additional links discussed during the podcast are below. If you want to recommend somebody to appear on the podcast as a guest, please email us at info@opsqc.com. If you're interested in sponsoring a podcast, please reach out to us at the same email. We'd love to have your support.